The war that shaped the modern world. World War I and the birth of the 20th century. World War I, 1914 to 1918, is often called the war that shaped the modern world because it fundamentally transformed politics, society, economics, technology, and international relations. Though it began as a regional European conflict, it quickly expanded into a global war whose consequences reshaped borders, destroyed empires, altered ideologies, and laid the foundations for both the modern international system and future conflicts. 1. The world before the war. Before 1914, Europe was dominated by powerful empires, the British, German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires. Industrialization had brought economic growth and technological advancement, but it also intensified competition among nations. Four key forces created a volatile environment. Nationalism. Ethnic groups sought independence, especially in the Balkans. Militarism. European powers built massive armies and glorified war. Imperialism. Competition for colonies increased global tensions. Alliance systems. Europe was divided into rival blocs, meaning a small conflict could escalate quickly. These factors turned Europe into a powder keg waiting for a spark. 2. The outbreak of World War I. The immediate cause of the war was the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo by a Serbian nationalist. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and alliance obligations rapidly drew other powers into the conflict. Allied powers, Britain, France, Russia, later the USA, Italy, and others. Central powers, Germany, Austria, Hungary, Ottoman Empire, Bulgaria. What many believed would be a short war turned into a devastating 4-year conflict. 3. A new kind of warfare. World War I introduced industrialized, mechanized warfare on an unprecedented scale. Trench warfare soldiers dug long trenches, especially on the Western Front, leading to stalemates and horrific living conditions. Battles like Verdun and the Somme caused millions of casualties with little territorial gain. New weapons, machine guns, increased killing power. Poison gas introduced chemical warfare. Tanks changed land combat, submarines, U-boats, transformed naval warfare aircraft, introduced aerial combat and bombing. This technological leap made war more deadly than ever before. 4. The global nature of the war. Though centered in Europe, World War I was truly global. Fighting occurred in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. Colonies supplied troops, labor, and resources. The United States entered the war in 1917, tipping the balance in favor of the Allies. The war mobilized entire societies, marking the rise of total war, where civilians became deeply involved in the war effort. 5. The collapse of empires. World War I destroyed 4 major empires: German Empire, Austro-Hungarian Empire, Ottoman Empire, Russian Empire. Their collapse led to the creation of new nations, such as Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, but many borders were drawn without regard for ethnic or religious realities, sowing seeds of future conflicts. 6. Political and ideological transformations. Rise of communism. The war weakened Russia, leading to the Russian Revolution of 1917 and the birth of the Soviet Union, introducing communism as a major global ideology. Decline of monarchies. Absolute monarchies lost legitimacy, while republican and democratic ideas spread. Rise of extremism, economic devastation, and political instability created conditions that later allowed fascism and Nazism to rise, particularly in Germany and Italy. 7. The Treaty of Versailles and its consequences. In 1919, the Allies imposed the Treaty of Versailles on Germany. The treaty blamed Germany for the war, forced massive territorial losses, imposed heavy reparations, severely limited Germany's military. Rather than securing peace, the treaty bred resentment and economic hardship, directly contributing to the outbreak of World War II 2 decades later. 8. Social change and the role of women. The war transformed societies, Women entered factories and offices in large numbers, accelerating movements for women's rights and suffrage. Class structures shifted as aristocratic power declined. Millions of veterans returned traumatized, influencing culture, literature, and psychology. The concept of modern trauma, shell shock, now PTSD, emerged from the war. 9. The birth of the modern international system. World War I led to efforts to prevent future wars. Creation of the League of Nations, the first global organization aimed at maintaining peace. Expansion of international diplomacy and cooperation. Development of modern international law. Although the League ultimately failed, it laid the groundwork for the United Nations. 10. Why World War I shaped the modern world. World War I reshaped the modern world by redrawing global maps, ending centuries-old empires, introducing modern warfare and total war, accelerating social and political change, creating conditions for World War II, establishing the foundations of modern geopolitics. The war marked the true beginning of the modern age, influencing nearly every major event of the 20th century. Conclusion. World War I was not just a war, it was a turning point in human history. Its effects continue to shape global politics, international relations, and social structures today. Understanding this war is essential to understanding the modern world itself, for in its trenches, treaties, and transformations, the foundations of our present reality were forged. Part 2. The Aftermath, Legacy, and Long Shadow of World War I-11. Economic destruction and global instability. World War I left Europe economically shattered. Entire regions were destroyed, industries collapsed, and national debt soared. European economies shifted from production to survival. Inflation devastated savings, especially in Germany. War loans made the United States the world's leading economic power. The war marked the end of European economic dominance and the rise of a new global financial order led by the US 12. The interwar period, a fragile peace, 1919 to 1939. The years between the two world wars were marked by instability rather than peace. Political instability. New nations formed after the war struggled with weak governments, ethnic tensions, lack of economic resources. Many democracies collapsed, replaced by authoritarian regimes. The Great Depression. The global economic crisis of the 1930s worsened conditions created by World War I. Mass unemployment, poverty, and hunger. Loss of faith in democratic systems. This environment made radical ideologies appealing. 13. Rise of fascism and Nazism. World War I directly contributed to the rise of extremist movements. Germany, humiliation from the Treaty of Versailles. Economic collapse and hyperinflation. National pride shattered. These factors enabled Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party to rise to power, promising revenge, stability, and national restoration. Italy. Despite being on the winning side, Italy felt betrayed by the peace settlements. This led to the rise of Benito Mussolini and fascism. World War I did not end violence, it reshaped it. 14. Cultural and psychological impact. The war deeply affected human thought, art, and culture. Literature and art. Writers and artists rejected old ideals of heroism and progress. Themes of disillusionment, loss, and trauma became dominant. Modernist movements emerged in literature, art, and philosophy. Psychological trauma. Shell shock revealed the mental cost of war, changed how societies viewed mental health, influenced modern psychology and psychiatry. The war shattered the belief that technology and progress guaranteed a better future. 15. Changes in warfare and military thinking. World War I revolutionized military strategy. Mass conscription became standard. Civilian populations became targets. Scientific research became central to warfare. Future conflicts would no longer be limited battles. They would be total wars involving entire nations. 16. The Middle East, a lasting impact. The collapse of the Ottoman Empire reshaped the Middle East. Borders drawn by European powers ignored ethnic and religious realities. Artificial states were created. Long-term instability followed many modern Middle Eastern conflicts can be traced directly back to post-World War I settlements. 17. From League of Nations to United Nations. Although the League of Nations failed to prevent World War II, it introduced key ideas: collective security, international diplomacy, global cooperation. After World War II, these ideas evolved into the United Nations, still central to world politics today. 18. Lessons learned and forgotten. World War I taught critical lessons. Harsh peace settlements create resentment. Nationalism can be destructive. War affects civilians as much as soldiers. International cooperation is essential for peace. Yet many of these lessons were ignored, leading directly to World War II. 19. Why the war still matters today. World War I continues to shape the modern world by influencing international borders, global power structures, military strategy, political ideologies, cultural memory of war. Modern conflicts, alliances, and diplomatic tensions still reflect the outcomes of this war. Final conclusion. World War I was the great turning point of modern history. It ended the old world of empires and monarchies and gave birth to a new era defined by nation-states, ideological struggle, and global conflict. The war's legacy is not only found in history books, but in today's political borders, international institutions, and ongoing struggles for peace. To understand the modern world, its conflicts, alliances, and fears, we must understand the war that shaped it. Part 3. From World War I to World War II. A road paved by unfinished business. 20. An unfinished peace. World War I ended fighting, but it did not end conflict. The peace treaties focused on punishment rather than reconciliation. Germany was blamed for the war, stripped of land, forced to pay reparations, and denied military strength. Instead of healing Europe, this approach deepened bitterness and anger. Many Germans viewed the war's end not as defeat, but as betrayal, a belief that weakened democracy and fueled extremist propaganda. 21. The failure of collective security. The League of Nations lacked real power. No standing army decisions required unanimous agreement. Key nations, including the USA, never joined. When Japan invaded Manchuria, Italy attacked Ethiopia, and Germany rearmed, the League failed to act decisively. This showed aggressor states that international law could be ignored without consequence. 22. Economic collapse and political extremism. The economic consequences of World War I never truly ended. War debts destabilized Europe, reparations hurt Germany's economy. The Great Depression pushed societies into desperation. In this climate, extremist leaders promised order, jobs, and national revival. Democracy seemed weak. Dictatorship appeared efficient. 23. Hitler's rise, a direct legacy of World War I. Adolf Hitler was a World War I veteran who used the war's legacy as political fuel. Claimed Germany had been stabbed in the back, promised to overturn the Treaty of Versailles, exploited national humiliation and fear of communism. Without World War I, the conditions that enabled Hitler's rise would not have existed. 24. Militarization and rearmament. World War I changed how nations prepared for war. Armies focused on speed and technology. Air power became central. Tanks and mechanized forces replaced trench warfare. Germany applied these lessons in Blitzkrieg, while other nations failed to adapt quickly enough. 25. Ideological conflict becomes global. After World War I, the world entered an age of ideological struggle. Democracy, fascism, communism. World War II became not just a war between nations, but a war between ideas. This ideological conflict later continued during the Cold War. 26. The Second World War. The war. World War I created. Many historians argue that World War II was the continuation of World War I by other means. The same unresolved tensions, borders, and resentments re-emerged on a larger and more destructive scale. World War II did not replace World War I, it completed it. 27. World War I and the birth of modern warfare ethics. The horrors of World War I led to attempts to regulate war. Bans on chemical weapons, rules for treatment of prisoners, early war crimes, discussions. Although these efforts were imperfect, They shaped modern international humanitarian law. 28. Memory, commemoration, and identity. World War I became deeply embedded in national memory. War memorials in every town, annual remembrance ceremonies, the concept of honoring the unknown soldier. The war shaped national identities and collective trauma that still influence politics and culture today. 29. How World War I created the modern world order. By the mid-20th century, the modern world had emerged from World War I's legacy. Nation-states replaced empires. The U.S. emerged as a global leader. International institutions became essential warfare, became global, technological, and total. The war reshaped how nations think about power, security, and responsibility. Final reflection. World War I was not merely a historical event, it was a foundational rupture. It destroyed the old world and forced humanity into a new, uncertain era. Every major conflict, political ideology, and international institution of the 20th century traces its roots back to this war. To study World War I is to study the birth of the modern world, with all its promise, contradictions, and dangers. Part 4. World War I and its impact on the world today. 30. Modern borders and ongoing conflicts. Many of today's political tensions originate from decisions made after World War I. Borders in Eastern Europe remain influenced by post-war settlements. The Middle East still reflects boundaries drawn by colonial powers after the Ottoman Empire collapsed. Ethnic and religious conflicts often stem from borders created without local consent. The war's legacy lives on in unresolved territorial and national disputes. 31. The evolution of global power. World War I permanently altered global leadership. Europe declined as the center of world power. The United States emerged as a dominant political, economic, and military force. Former colonies began demanding independence. This shift laid the foundation for the post-World War II world order and modern geopolitics. 32. The roots of modern international institutions. Institutions that shape today's world trace their origins to World War I. The League of Nations pioneered international cooperation. Modern diplomacy expanded after the war. Concepts such as collective security became central to global peace efforts. These ideas later evolved into the United Nations, NATO, and international courts. 33. War, technology, and the modern state. World War I showed governments the power of science and technology. State-sponsored research became normal. Governments gained greater control over economies. Surveillance, propaganda, and mass communication expanded. Modern states still use many systems first developed during the war. 34. Media, propaganda, and public opinion. World War I was the first war fought with mass propaganda. Newspapers, posters, and films shaped public opinion. Governments learned to mobilize populations psychologically. National narratives were carefully constructed. Today's information warfare and media influence trace their roots back to this era. 35. Human rights and the laws of war. The scale of suffering during World War I forced new thinking about human rights. Rules for treatment of prisoners of war, restrictions on certain weapons, recognition of civilian protection. These efforts shaped modern humanitarian law, influencing how wars are judged today. 36. The war and the rise of national identity. World War I strengthened national consciousness. Shared sacrifice created powerful national myths. War memory shaped political culture. Veterans influenced public life. National identity remains a major force in global politics, often in ways shaped by the war. 37. Lessons for the 21st century. World War I offers urgent lessons for today. Alliances can escalate small conflicts. Nationalism can become destructive. Economic punishment can fuel extremism. Peace requires justice, not humiliation. These lessons remain deeply relevant in a world facing new global tensions. 38. Why the war still defines the modern world. World War I matters today because it created the political map of the modern era, redefined warfare and state power, shaped international cooperation, influenced modern ideologies and conflicts. The modern world is, in many ways, a product of World War I. Final conclusion of the series. World War I was the turning point that divided history into before and after. It ended the age of empires and launched a century of ideological struggle, technological warfare, and global interdependence. Understanding this war is essential, not only to understand the past, but to navigate the present and shape a more peaceful future. 39. World War I as a historical turning point. Historians often describe World War I as the great dividing line of modern history. Everything before 1914 belonged to an older world of empires, monarchies, and limited warfare. Everything after it moved toward a new reality shaped by mass politics, ideological conflict, and global war. The war transformed history from a European-centered story into a truly global one. 40. Key themes that define the war's impact. Several major themes explain why World War I shaped the modern world more than any previous conflict. A. Total war. For the first time, entire societies, not just armies, were mobilized. Civilians became workers, targets, and symbols of national morale. B. Mass politics. Governments depended on public opinion, propaganda, and nationalism. This permanently changed the relationship between the state and its people. C. Ideological conflict. The war accelerated the spread of communism, fascism, and modern democracy, turning ideas into weapons. D. Technological warfare science became inseparable from military power, a reality that continues today. 41. The human cost. A lost generation. More than 16 million people died, and millions more were wounded or psychologically scarred. An entire generation of young men was lost. Families and communities were permanently damaged. Faith in progress, reason, and civilization was deeply shaken. The term lost generation reflects not only deaths, but shattered hopes and beliefs. 42. World War I and modern memory. The way we remember war today was shaped by World War I. War memorials and remembrance days. The symbol of the unknown soldier. Poetry, novels, and films focused on trauma rather than glory. Modern anti-war movements draw heavily on World War I memory. 43. Long-term global consequences. The long-term consequences of World War I include the creation of unstable nation-states, the rise of the United States as a superpower, the weakening of Europe, the inevitability of World War II, the birth of modern international diplomacy. Few events in history have produced such wide-ranging effects. 44. World War I in today's world. Even in the 21st century, the war's legacy is visible. Ongoing conflicts in Eastern Europe and the Middle East, international institutions designed to prevent global war military strategies rooted in lessons learned from 1914 to 1918. Political movements fueled by nationalism and historical memory. The modern world still lives in the shadow of World War I.